Okay, so this is the second part of a short lecture on Shinto. And I'd like to start this class by looking, looking at some Japanese artwork. And I think you'll find what I like to share in this artwork is some of we've been looking at how the three traditions of Shinto, Confucianism, and Buddhism interlock with each other in Japanese culture. And I think when we look at this artwork I'm about to share with you, that you may see some elements of that. So the first piece of art that I want to share here, you can see a circle. You can see a circle. And these are, you see these around the circle, these are Chinese characters. And it's the Chinese characters that comprise what's called the Heart Sutra. So the Heart Sutra is a Buddhist sutra. And it's a kind of a core teachings within Buddhism. The first character is right here where my little plus sign is. It's the title, Maka Hanya Haramita Shingyo. And then it continues, Kanji Zaibo Sagyo Jin Hanya Haramita Jisho Kengo Kaiku Do Isaiku Yakushari Shishihu Ikuku. And it goes on. It takes about maybe 3 or 4 minutes to recite that. And if you look closely at this circle, what's inside the circle, you see this little dot here. And that dot is a grain of rice. And if you look more closely here, you can see the contours of a hand. The hand might be hard to see because it's so much a part of the darkness that is behind it. But if you look closely, you can see a hand. And in the palm of the hand is this grain of rice. Now I want to show you a close-up view of this. Let's look at this. So we're going to get a little bit closer. Here we go. And maybe you can see a little bit more clearly this hand. The artist that made this is I want to say he was some kind of a scientist, a Japanese man named Iwasaki Tsuneo. And his artwork is just phenomenal. It's just phenomenal. I mean, as you can see in this particular image. And a Japanese American professor that I'm acquainted with, Paula Arai, wrote this book on his paintings. And she's written commentary on several of his pieces. So this is one of them. And it's called A Grain of Rice. I think this is very appropriate as we enter into the Thanksgiving season, in fact. But she asked the question, what nourishes us? What nourishes us? Remembering how, during the severe food rationing of World War II, his mother said to care for each grain of rice, Iwasaki depicts her gently curving hand, tenderly holding a single grain of rice. He paints a Heart Sutra corona around her diaphanous hand, inviting us to feel reverence for the treasure on which the circle of life depends. So here we have, this is my way of looking at this, seeing different elements come through here of Asian thought. You have the obvious Buddhist element of the Heart Sutra. But then you've got this idea of the author, the illustrator, the artist, Iwasaki Tsuneo, is painting an image of his mother's hand and the grain of rice in that hand. So there's a kind of an honoring of his mother as an ancestor. And as we've been studying Shinto, we know that many see the ancestors, many Japanese see the ancestors as kami, as kind of divine presence. Once somebody dies, it's almost as though they're elevated to the level of kami, or some would say elevated to the level of Buddha. They become Buddha. So a person that has been deeply influential in your life gets elevated, like your mother, to the level of a Buddha or of a kami. And we get this sense of reverence just in thinking about that. You know, World War II was a really devastating and pivotal period for Japanese society. They were a world power, and in many ways still are a world power. And yet during the Second World War, they experienced the extremes of poverty, food shortages. And so here is this artist remembering his mother during World War II and telling him, take care of every grain of rice. Do not waste it. Do not waste even a single grain of rice. This is a kind of a precious statement from this particular artist. It says a lot about Japanese culture, about the idea of not wasting anything. That's so fundamental to Japanese society, not to waste a thing. There's a phrase, I'm trying to remember, my mind just went blank there, but anyways, I can't remember, but it has the sentiment of not wasting a thing. And, you know, as we're going into Thanksgiving, consider the abundance of food that we receive. And maybe perhaps in our time, you might think of a grain of corn being in the palm of the hand. You know, we have these cornfields surrounding us here in Iowa. So much corn. How much of that corn gets wasted, gets thrown out? Would we really do that if we saw the preciousness of food? Would we really do that? You know, and sometimes it's only in times of scarcity that we really see how precious food is. I was out to visit a friend's farm a few weeks ago, and she was just so saddened by the derecho because it had wiped out so much of their corn crop, and they were told by the insurance company to just let the corn rot in the field. And so we were out there you couldn't use a combine on the corn to pick it up. So we were out there by hand picking up whatever corn we could salvage, but there was loads of corn on that field that was not going to be gotten to. And you could just feel the sadness in her heart that all of this corn that was raised was not going to be able to be used in any way, at least by humans, probably not even by animals. So the preciousness of food. So here's another image from the same book I want to share with you.
I just have one quick comment to make.
Yeah.
I think sometimes you actually have to go through a hungry period to realize that there are people that do that all the time. There was many times growing up, we had, you know, hungry periods. You know, there was no bread. You know, your dinner was, you get one spoon of peanut butter and that was dinner. So I think sometimes sometimes you have to experience something so that you can have a real empathy for other people and not look at just the dollar signs.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thanks, Lisa. Yeah, and it's easy for us to forget as human beings. You're one or two, we're one or two generations removed from extreme lack of resources, and it's almost like we forget that it could ever happen to us. But I think we can't get enough reminders about the importance of taking care of what we've got. And thanks for sharing that story. All right, the next one I want to share with you here is this one. All right, so this is another image from the book. And what this is it's a depiction of an eclipse. So down on the left here, you see the Earth, and these circles are the blocking of the. This is the sun, actually, and then you see here is the moon, and a little dot here is the dark spot where the eclipse is. So these circles are kind of depicting the sun. And can you see this image here? There's two eyes and a mouth. This is kind of a ferocious. I'm going to give you a close-up on this. What this is, these circles are that same Heart Sutra from the previous image. It's the same Heart Sutra. So that's a Buddhist sutra. And it's been written in a kind of elliptical fashion. And then out of this Heart Sutra, you see this particular kind of a ferocious image. Let me show you the close-up of it. You see that? And those two eyes, the mouth, the kind of teeth. This is said to be the Fudo Myo. So I want to share with you what Paula Arai writes about Fudo Myo. She says, wreathed in flames of wisdom, Fudo Myo is a manifestation of the Sun Buddha, Mahavarochana, or Dainichi Nyorai. Remember, last class we talked about that Sun Buddha, Dainichi Nyorai, as a place where this intersection of Shinto and Buddhism took place because of the importance of the sun in Japanese culture, and the idea of the sun goddess Amaterasu playing an integral part of the creation and maintaining of the Japanese islands. And so you see this kind of intermixing. This Fudo Myo is a manifestation, is one of the manifestations of this great sun Buddha. She says, Iwasaki paints this agent of compassion blazing in immense whirling convolutions of solar storm activity called solar prominences. Solar prominences are electrically charged hydrogen and helium atoms spewing out of sunspots along the magnetic field lines of the sun. Their temperatures soar to around 6,000 Kelvin, and their heights reach hundreds of thousands of kilometers. Fudo's wrathful visage, accentuated by one fang pointing up and another pointing down, piercingly glares at planet Earth and its moon. Gazing from the vantage point of Earth, the moon appears large. From the perspective of the sun, however, the moon is minuscule. Yet the meager moon has totally eclipsed the enormous sun from Earth's view. Let's take a look at the larger image again that encompasses. You see that? All right, these solar, what she calls them, magnetic field lines of the sun. So the artist is a really interesting person because he, like I said, he is a scientist. So he studied science for many years, and then in his older age, he became this amazing artist, and he depicts some of these scientific discoveries. And it's a kind of a blending of religion and science right here. So it's another example of how the Japanese are able to integrate views that seemed maybe perhaps to the Western mind to be totally in opposite directions. You know, we have this argument of is it faith or is it science? Is it Darwin or is it creation? And you know, here I find this refreshing to see that an artist is able to combine these insights of Buddhism, of religion, to the insights of science, right? In a beautiful art form. And we also see not just elements of Buddhism, but through Fudo-myo, elements of Shinto as well. So it gives you the sense of this ability of the Japanese to incorporate different ways of thinking about the world and combine them. All right. So now I'm doing a screen share now of my slideshow. Let me find where I wanted to start with. All right. So what I'd like us to do now is look at our book. A second. So what I like to do at the remaining of this lecture is we're going to have a little history and a little bit more on the history of Japan within the perspective of Shinto. And last class we looked at the ancient period of Shinto, like kind of getting a sense of what kami is, and humans can be kami, human beings can be kami. This time today we'll look at the medieval period, and this is where you have this coming in of Buddhism and Confucianism, and then the modern period. Okay, so that's kind of the overall picture of what we'll look at now. So let's look at the medieval period first. And the date where Confucianism and Buddhism are introduced into Japan is 538 CE. So I'm going to ask, exactly. So yeah, so the Confucian element that that was brought to the Japanese was ethics, right? And that's not to say that there were no ethics. I mean, I feel like that's a little bit misleading to say, well, before Confucianism entered Japanese society, they were unethical. I don't think that's quite the case. But there was a kind of Confucianism provided a structure, a way of thinking about relationships that hadn't been there prior to Confucianism. So we're moving into this medieval period, 538 CE. And the ethics that, you know, this idea of concentric circles, right? And we studied this in Confucianism, where the person is at the center. That doesn't mean they're at the center of the universe. It means that the relationship begins with oneself and one's relationship with rectifying the heart, but then goes into family, into the local community. So the spheres of influence just get wider and wider, the local community, society, government, and the natural world. So Confucian ethics kind of links all of those different layers of reality together. into one single cohesion of concentric circles. The individual, the family, the society, the political sphere, and then on the widest ring is the natural world. All of those we need to kind of connect with in a relational way in order to become more fully human. How about Buddhism? What does Buddhism offer the Japanese? Anyone want to hazard a guess there? What does Buddhism offer the Japanese that wasn't there before?
Death would be one, wouldn't it?
Exactly, yeah, death.
A ritual for the goodbye to get them to the next place.
Exactly, yeah, yeah. So Shinto very much focuses on life and life affirming rituals like births and marriages, and death is considered kind of an impurity. So Buddhism sees an inroads into Japanese culture because it focuses on suffering, it focuses on death, gives a framework for dealing with these things. And Buddhist priests become, they begin to make their living through funeral and memorial services, something that Shinto would have been glad to give up to Buddhists. So you also have this integration of Buddhism in Japan. In 604, you have Prince Shotoku. So that's one of the main guys who kind of begins this integration process. And the first article in his so-called 17 Articles Constitution is that Confucianism is foundational for social and political harmony. And the second article talks about taking refuge in the three treasures. Do you remember what the three treasures are?
The sword, mine went blank, sorry. All I can remember is the sword.
The sword? Not exactly. Good guess though.
Oh, not for Shinto? This is the Buddhism one?
Yeah, do you remember?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, what is that?
Shinto had the sword, but
yeah, we gotta just kind of asking you to kind of stretch back there to our Buddhism class. What are the three treasures? What are the three central core teachings within Buddhism? There's the three treasures. Take a stab, take a guess at it with your sword.
With my sword. Okay, let's go back to Buddhism.
Is one compassion?
That's one of the, in an indirect way, I will say, I'll give you that. Yeah. So the Dharma, that would be the teachings. Yeah.
And
okay.
What was that, Karima?
Tanaka or something like that.
Okay, yeah, that would be another example of the Dharma. So impermanence, that's the teachings. So the first one, yeah, you guys are taking good
Buddha.
guesses here. But go ahead.
Is a Buddha one?
Buddha, yeah, Buddha is one taking refuge in the Buddha.
I don't remember the last one. You said Buddha,
take
Dharma.
Refuge, okay.
Yeah.
Take refuge in Buddha, take refuge in Dharma, and
Humility, something like that.
Humanity, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, Sangha, community. Yeah, those are the three treasures. Good job, y'all. So taking refuge in, so in this constitution, in the Japanese constitution of this says 604 BCE. Actually, that's wrong. It should be CE, current era. So that's a mistake there. It's talking about taking refuge in the three treasures, in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. So this is and what happens when a political leader makes such a statement is that it's oftentimes embraced by the populace. When a religious leader embraces a particular religion or religions, then the populace also joins in on that. So it's a powerful thing for a political leader to state both the importance of Confucianism and Buddhism in this particular constitution. Another place where we see the relationship between Buddhism and Shinto is with the kami. So if you look at this image here, this is a Shinto spirit. And I've seen these in Japan when I visited temples. They are the guardian spirits at the entrance of the temples. And so like anybody who enters a temple, not all temples have them, but if you ever go to the city of Kyoto, one of the most beautiful cities in the world is Kyoto. And it's loaded with Shinto shrines and Buddhist temples. And people go there to sightsee all of the time. And outside of, or just at the entranceway of many Buddhist temples, you see these huge, sometimes wooden statues of various gods. Oftentimes the god of wind or thunder, and you can see that kind of menacing. Look at the eyes there in these gods, and they are meant to be protectors of the Buddha. And so you have this interesting kind of intermixing taking place when Buddhism enters, and there's temples that are made. The Shinto, there's a saying, you can take the New Yorker out of New York, but you can't take the New York out of the New Yorker. And I think the same is true for the Japanese. You can take the Shinto, you can take a Japanese out of Japan, but you can't get rid of the Shinto, even if you bring in Buddhism. In other words, you can't get rid of it. And so because Shinto is such a primal part of Japanese culture and identity, what happens when you have the foreign influence of Buddhism? Well, Shinto is right there, right next to it. So you have these Shinto guardian spirits at the entrance of the shrines, and they are there. The fierceness of their eyes are said to wake people up, like a Buddha would wake people up, but also to protect the Dharma. Buddhist monks are in charge of Shinto shrines. Buddhist monks become in charge of Shinto shrines. That would be like having Christian priests being in charge of Buddhist temples, right, in the United States. I think that's probably never going to happen, but that was what happened in Japan. Buddhist sutras are also recited at shrines. So you have Buddhist monks in charge of Shinto shrines, and then at the shrines themselves, there's sutras, Buddhist sutras being chanted. Here's an image of in another area where Shinto and Buddhism intermix is in No dramas, N-O-H. And these are plays that often involve evil spirits that have possessed somebody, and Buddhist priests who will then recite a sutra to either banish the evil spirit or to tame the evil spirit. And if you watch Mimi-nashi, you can see something similar. Listen to, in your essay questions, when you listen to Mimi-nashi, you can see a similar sentiment there. So I want to do a share of it. Another place where Shintoism mixes in this medieval period with Buddhism is in this, what's called the Yamabushi. Those who sleep in the mountains, or those who bow to the mountains. Yama meaning mountain, and Bushi means to bow down to. So we're going to watch a video here. It's a short video that interviews a Yamabushi, and he gives you the sense of this intersection of Buddhism and Shinto. Oh, bear with me just a second. Okay. Hopefully you can see this here.
山伏っていうのはそうですね、修験道は、仏教の一つに数えられてて、1300年前に円の行者が、始めたと言われてる、宗教の一つなんですけれども、仏教ともともと日本にある多分自然崇拝がこうミックスされて、神道的な考えがミックスされて、できた宗教なんですけれども、山伏というのはその山に伏してというふうに読んで字のごとく漢字なんですけども、山で修行する、修験道の、坊さんと言ったらいいか、行者って言いますけどね。はい。我々山伏というのは半僧半俗と言いまして、半分僧侶半分俗人ということになりまして、普段は私ども山降りたら、普通の仕事があります。私の場合は、ちょっと共通しますけど山のガイドだったり、神社の前でカフェを営んでたり宿泊施設を営んでたりします。他の行者っていうのは本当にビジネスマンだったりいろんな方がいらっしゃいます。よく皆さんイメージされるのは滝に打たれたりとかっていうのもあるんですけども、ほとんど多いのはやっぱり塗装業といいましてね、山の中をただ歩くといいますか、そうですね、フィジカル的に自分を追い込んで悟りの境地に至るというのが近いかと思うんですけども、僕が修行している中で一番感じるのは座禅って言って、座って瞑想する座禅ってありますよね。それの歩きバージョンじゃないかなと、歩き禅じゃないかなっていうふうに感じることが多いです。奥分け道修行行きますと、本当に危険な場所とか山道が急ではあはあ言うてしんどい場所とかあるんですけど、そんなとこでもこう座禅ってこうただ座る、何も考えずにそういう境地で歩けると、修行も成功かなといつもそういうふうに考えてます。本宮大社の例大祭に来られてる行者さんたちは真言宗系なんで、僕が吹くのとまた違うホラーを吹きますよね。曲がちょっと違う。そうですね。僕らこういうポンポンがついてるでしょ。これ天台宗系の行者さんの一応こういうポンポンがついてるのが今朝をかけるんですけど、天台宗系の人はこういう金具の丸っこい金具がついてる金剛輪法を言うんですけど、金剛輪にこういう小さい丸っこいのがついてるのが天台宗系の人らが真言宗系の人らはそういう今朝をかけるんですね。でも最終的に、真言宗系の人たちも金具がついてるやつですけど、一番ハイエンドなところに来るとこういう今朝になるみたいですけどね。はい。やっ ぱりいろいろ宗派、宗派ってことないですけど、お寺ごとに違うみたいですよね、やっぱりね。やっぱりこう、山で修行してるから、他とあんまり交流せえへんから、みんな口伝えで代々受け継がれてるいうのが、本当なんでしょうね。そのやり方いうのが。はい、同じ天台宗系でも、吉野の金峰山寺が吹くホラ貝だったらホラと、僕らが吹くのとまた違ったりするんで、はい。やっぱりそれは、まあ、仏教っていうのは経典がありますけど、最終的に作法は口伝言うて口で伝えるところが、やっぱりそういうシークレットにせなあかんところが残ってるみたいでね、未だ残ってるみたいで、文書化されてないのがあって、やっぱり代々口伝えで言ってるみたいですけどね。はい。
All right. So the other thing I would like us to do now is to look at the following blog, and this one, just read through it. So I'm going to send you the link. I'm going to put it in the chat box here, and maybe about 3 pages or so. Lots of photos. It's about an American woman who spends a day with a Yamabushi, and she becomes a Yamabushi for a day. So you can actually do that kind of thing. So if you look in your chat box, you'll see a link to the blog. And as you're doing that, see if you can name the Buddhist and Shinto elements that the blog talks about, and also to think about what surprises you most about this particular writing. Okay, so go ahead and do that now.
I've copied it, but I don't have anywhere where I can make it, put it somewhere so that I won't lose it. So I got it in my.
Let me show you the screen again. This idea of this idea of the kami. Where is it? Well, I can't find it right now, but it was hard to see. In the video, there was a rope that extended across the altar space, and that rope, like beyond that rope, is said to be where the kami resides, where the divine presence is. And in the video, we see the Japanese man kind of waving that stick in front, and so he's kind of like a transmitter of the kami to those who are present there. So moving into the modern period, there's a real shift that takes place. There's a real shift. So the medieval period is marked by this integration of Confucianism, Buddhism, and Shinto. The modern period, something very different happens. And maybe we could trace it back to the Mongol invasions from the years 1274 to 1281. And this is where we get that word kamikaze from. Remember, there's this idea that, well, during the Mongol invasions, they tried, I think it was on 3, if history serves, if I remember history correctly, there were 3 separate occasions where the Mongols tried to invade Japan. And now keep in mind, the Mongols had taken over all of China and beyond. So a very powerful society. And they wanted Japan as well. And the Japanese were very much in fear of a Mongol invasion. They, you know, if the rest of China couldn't hold them off, then how would Japan do that? Well, the Mongols decided they were excellent on horse, but not by ship. And they also they weren't aware of the seasons. And they happened to go to Japan at the time of the typhoon season. And their ships were not, most of their ships got destroyed by the typhoons. And so the Japanese called those typhoons, there's a kamikaze, a wind, a divine wind came and saved them from the Mongols. And that kind of reinforced this idea of the superiority of the Japanese. And they start to reevaluate their native Shinto beliefs. Listen to this particular, this nationalistic sentiment starts to emerge. And so we're jumping ahead here 500 years to the 1700s. This man, Motori Norinaga, he writes, "Our country's imperial line, which casts its light over this world, represents the descendants of the sky-shining goddess Amaterasu. And in accordance with that goddess's mandate of reigning forever and ever, coeval with heaven and earth, the imperial line is destined to rule the nation for eons until the end of time. And as long as the universe exists, it can also be seen why foreign countries cannot match ours and what is meant by the special dispensation of our country." So we start to see the emergence of really super nationalistic sentiments, like Japan is somehow superior to other nations. And so what happens is around the mid-1800s, Japan, during the Tokugawa period, which precedes the Meiji Restoration, so we're talking around the 15 to 1700s, Japan closes itself off to foreigners. And there's only one or two ports where people can actually enter. One of them was Nagasaki, and that's the entrance place for where Christianity actually comes into Japan. But the rest of Japan was very closed off to any foreign influence, and they felt like that would keep them strong. One of the Buddhist priests that I trained with said that the Japanese saw what was happening in the rest of Asia. First, Christian missionaries would go into a place, and then it would be followed by foreign countries invading. And so they thought, well, if we don't allow Christian missionaries into our country, there will not be foreign invasions that follow. Well, that worked pretty well for a long time until Western nations like the United States and other European nations had enough of of Japan being closed off, and they began to attack Japan. And because Japan's technology, war technology, was not up to par with European and European nations at that time, they were easily defeated. So this is a huge, the 1868 is a huge wake-up period for Japan. They become a modern nation almost overnight, where it's taken other nations long periods of time to go from pre-industrial to a modern state. Japan does this within a period of a couple of decades. It's just phenomenal how quickly they managed to change the culture. And one of the things that became a part of that change is this very nationalistic sentiment where everything native to Japan is what gives them strength, and anything foreign, including the religions of Buddhism and Confucianism, were things to be rejected. So if they could only reject Buddhism, then they would be stronger for it. And they actually make great strides to cripple Buddhism in their country. So it's said that Buddhist monks could grow their hair out, they could marry, they could eat meat. These are things that they weren't supposed to be doing. In reality, perhaps, and this is another story, but the Buddhist monks were already you know, as the Buddhist tradition, when it where it comes from in Asia, monks were not allowed to marry. But in Japan, there's a lot of evidence to show that monks did have partners, but because of this rule against marriage, they just remained illegitimate. And what the Meiji Restoration did was legitimize what they were already doing. Eating meat is another aspect of that. But also monks were asked to, if they were a head of a shrine, then they were asked to disrobe. So there's a reversal. The other thing that was happening prior to this Meiji Restoration period, and as a way to keep Christianity at bay, the Buddhist temples, everybody had to register themselves, their families, at the local Buddhist temple. And this way, the Japanese could say, if they were asked what their religion is, they would say they belong to this particular, we're Buddhists, we go to this temple, right? But with the Meiji Restoration, that gets reversed. And instead of registering at a Buddhist temple, they're required to register at the local Shinto shrine. And there's this forcible separation of Shinto from Buddhism. And so like I showed before, there's this merger where in the medieval period, there's this merger of Buddhism and Shinto taking place. In the modern period, there's actually a separation that takes place. And so temples are one thing and shrines are another thing. They're not integrated, or they're forcibly separated. Japan becomes a formidable world power, right? In 1895, look at that. Taiwan is colonized by the Japanese, Korea, and you know, the Japanese, horrible things happened between the Japanese soldiers and Koreans that I don't even want to repeat here. Manchuria is colonized in the 1930s. My teacher's teacher, his family had to leave Manchuria after the Second World War because they lost all of their property. China and Southeast Asia were invaded during World War II. And so the Japanese really saw themselves as superior to the other Asian nations around them. And here, this is a quote from your text. Japanese considered their foreign aggression a divine mission to be carried out without remorse or hesitation. So for example, consider the kamikaze pilots. You remember what that word means, kamikaze? Divine wind, right, yeah. And where does it come from? Where does that term come from originally?
Kami is the divine part. Kaze is the wind when the Mongols was trying to take over Japan. They didn't know how to handle they didn't know the right time to come into the sea to get to Japan.
Right, exactly. So I want to share with you a really, what I feel is like a really precious story that my teacher shared with me. So my Zen teacher, that is, she lived in Japan for about 23 years, or native to Pennsylvania. And prior to her entering into the Zen monastery life, she worked for various Japanese businesses, and her job was to teach English to the men, or whoever, I'm not sure it was just men, but to the businessmen, Japanese businessmen. That was her work. And one of the men, she noticed, was really diligent. His name was, I think it was Tanaka-san. I'm going to say Tanaka-san. It may have been somebody else, but I think it was Tanaka-san. He was very diligent. And my teacher at this point in time, this is prior to her becoming a Buddhist nun, and she kept a diary, and she shared that she wrote all kinds of things about her experience that were not necessarily things that she wanted to share with just anybody. And some of them were quite negative, you know. And that's what we use the diaries for. Sometimes we just get get her gut feel or raw feelings out. And she had accidentally left her diary at work one day, and she was feeling really embarrassed about it because she didn't want anybody to read what was inside of it. So she called up her workplace because she wasn't there at the, she had left it earlier. She called up the workplace, and Tanaka-san answered the phone, and she said to him, "Oh, I left my diary there. Would you mind making sure nobody, that it's kept safe?" And Tanaka-san said, "Of course, I will keep it, and nobody will look at it." And my teacher thought, you know what? I bet I'm sure that this man is going to be truthful to his words. He's not going to look at my diary. And there was something about Tanaka-san that she couldn't quite get her head around, but he was always the kind of like, she considered him kind of like a Boy Scout. He did everything to the utmost, was always super considerate. So one day at the end of the year, they had what they call bonenkai, to kill the old year. And the Japanese in this particular business, they got together, they would drink lots of sake and get drunk. And when the Japanese drink a lot, it gives, and I'm speaking in generalization, so please forgive me, but for generally speaking, the drinking allows Japanese to speak more freely. And that was the case in this bonenkai, where many of the folks that she was teaching English to began to speak up, her bosses. And the bosses of this organization began to speak up, and they said, they're all drunk, but Tanaka-san wasn't drinking. And so this one man, he pointed to Tanaka-san, he said, "Do you know why Tanaka-san doesn't drink? Do you know why he doesn't drink?" And my teacher was like, I don't know why, please share. Well, during World War II, it was his turn to be the kamikaze pilot. He was supposed to get into an airplane and fly the plane to Hawaii. But when each of the kamikaze pilots, they would be given a honorary shot of sake prior to getting in the plane. And when Tanaka-san over there was given his shot of sake, he was so drunk that he couldn't fly the plane. And so they had another pilot take his place so that he could recover and get on the next day's plane. What happened was that the war ended that day, and somebody else went in his place and died for him. So Tanaka-san is living for two people, for himself and for that man that died for him.
It would be hard to imagine, to think that you were that close to death and to see all the life he saw after that day, and to know that if it hadn't have been for the person that went in his place, that would have been him.
Yeah, right?
That would be a great burden.
A huge burden, huge burden. Yeah. Thanks for listening to it, folks. So that ends this particular unit on Shinto.